Jordan Peterson sat down with Graham Stephan on the Iced Coffee Hour to discuss faith, marriage, and alcohol. Let's jump into this video.
If your wife doesn't look good in a dress, do you tell her?
You say, don't ask me questions like that unless you want the answer. My answer to that is yes, you tell her. But like the thing is questions like that aren't realistic in a way because they strip out the necessary context. Like you can't tell your wife how she looks in a given outfit unless you've negotiated how to do that thoroughly. Right? So that would mean, for example, that both you and her are pleased if she looks attractive. And you might say, well, of course a husband's going to be pleased if if his wife looks attractive. It's like, really? How attractive? And to who? And when exactly? And also why? And those are very complicated issues. And so you see, there's no shortage of men who punish their wives every single time they look attractive.
This is something that should be talked about more often. In the covenant of marriage, you should want your wife to look attractive. But I think Jordan Peterson hits on something important. Attractive to who? Let's be honest here. Do you really want your wife wearing something that's too short or too revealing? Now, I get it. This is going to depend on what you agree would meet those standards. But ultimately, I don't think you will want a bunch of guys gawking at your wife. Let's be real. Now, a lot of times you'll hear verses about how wives should submit to their husbands, but you don't hear the verses leading to this point. Let's go ahead and take a look at a couple of these. It's Ephesians 5:25. Husbands, love your wives, as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. Verse 28. In the same way, husbands should love their wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. Colossians 2:19. Husbands, love your wives and do not be harsh with them. 1 Peter 3:7. Likewise, husbands, live with your wives in an understanding way, showing honor to the woman as the weaker vessel, since they are heirs with you of the grace of life, so that your prayers may not be hindered.
Things are going on. I know it's the white lie conundrum, right?
Yeah.
If you ever have to tell a white lie, you haven't set the situation up properly. There are times when the best you might be able to manage in that situation is a white lie, but that doesn't make it good.
There are other situations that I can think of. Like, for example, let's say there's been a long relationship. These people have been married for like 10 years, but then there's an ex of the guy and she reaches out to the guy for no reason. And this was a girl that your current wife has always had a little bit of come on, what's going on over there? Like they always were very insecure. They felt uneasy about that past relationship, right? And you've tried your best to talk it through, but you haven't done it, I guess, to make her comfortable enough. And you don't know if you can. Well, she texts you. Do you tell your wife that she texted you knowing it's just going to devolve into this thing when you have no feelings for your ex at all whatsoever, but you know it's going to create a catastrophe, all of these arguments and plates will be thrown, whatever. Do you still tell her or do you just throw it to the side because it means nothing to you?
This shouldn't be a difficult answer to give. Yes, you should tell her. Now, he does a good job of setting this question up, but honestly, this should be a straightforward answer. A question that came to mind for me as he was building this up is, why isn't your wife at ease about this? That will seem to indicate a lack of trust. Now, that can be for a variety of reasons, but as the husband, have you done everything you can do to make her feel secure? That is one of the duties of a husband. There are a few things you can do to avoid this scenario, right? You could change your number, depending on how things ended, maybe avoid having them on your social media. And to be fair, right? Listen, I get it. There are definitely those exes who can be persistent. And I would argue that that's even more of a reason of why you should tell your wife. To be clear, I don't think that for Christian married men, right? Focusing here on Christian husbands, this isn't a gray area. If you find yourself in this situation, there should be no debate. You tell your wife. The marriage covenant is built on trust, and you don't want to give the devil any room here. You want to be as honest and as upfront as you can all the time. especially when dealing with these kinds of situations.
What was the final straw that broke the camel's back for that? Was a certain book that you read, a personal experience? Because it's very
There's a
specific.
combination of both. I mean, my life in 1984 was still somewhat dissolute. You know, I liked to drink. And so I had a hedonistic orientation to some degree. And, you know, alcohol doesn't bring out the best in people's characters. Alcohol almost universally makes people less than they are. It's fun because it eradicates your concern for future consequences. It actually kind of does that physiologically, you might say, because alcohol is a potent anxiety reducing drug. For some people, it's also a psychomotor stimulant like cocaine, and it was certainly that for me. And for other for people too, it can have a heroin-like effect, which facilitates the sense of social belonging. And I think I had all three of those effects from alcohol. So I liked it quite a lot. But the consequence for me was, you know, I would misbehave when I was drinking in ways that made me remorseful the next day or the next 2 days or the next week. And I realized at that point that was a performative contradiction in a sense. Performative contradiction is when you act out something that's a lie, that's runs contrary to your moral beliefs, right?
Getting drunk isn't good for you. Isn't this just a groundbreaking revelation? I find it interesting how he compares the effects of alcohol to these very potent drugs that all people would agree are harmful. Yet some people still try to downplay the negative effects of alcohol. They try to minimize what it does and the impacts it has on you, your relationships, and your family. As someone who used to drink, what Jordan Peterson says really resonates with me. And much like him, I too will find myself remorseful for how I behaved. The scriptures actually talk quite a bit about drinking. Just a couple of verses here. It's Proverbs 20, verse 1. Wine is a mocker, strong drink a brawler, and whoever is led astray by it is not wise. Proverbs 23, verses 20 through 21. Be not among drunkards or among gluttonous eaters of meat, for the drunkard and the glutton will come to poverty, and slumber will clothe them with rags. Proverbs 31, 4 through 5. It is not for kings, all and well, it is not for kings to drink wine, or for rulers to take strong drink, lest they drink and forget what has been decreed, and pervert the rights of all the afflicted. So I think the scripture shows us here two very good examples of how wine distorts your ability to think clearly, to think in a way that's beneficial for those around you. And I really appreciate how in Proverbs 31, it's talking to leaders, right? To kings. When you're not thinking clearly, you don't make good decisions. And if you're in a position of leadership, not thinking clearly can be very harmful for those people you are trying to lead, for those very people that you are, in essence, responsible for those very people that you are trying to care for. So when you apply this to the context of families, right? You got a father, mother, children. The father is drunk. He can't care for his family as he should. And just so we're clear, this doesn't mean that all alcohol consumption is bad. 1 Timothy 5:23. All right, this is the Apostle Paul talking to Timothy. No longer drink only water, but use a little wine for the sake of your stomach and your frequent ailments. I think it's important to mention this here because you'll hear a lot of people say, oh, you shouldn't drink at all. I think there are instances where, especially in this scenario here, where it's for his physical well-being, right? A little bit of wine helps him with his stomach. I also think when you're thinking about the context of celebrations, right? One example that I think gets often overlooked, and it's one of those examples that gets used often, so I'm not sure why it gets overlooked. In the Gospel of John, Jesus is at a wedding party in Cana, and the weddings back then, there were parties, like they were going on for like a week at least. So Jesus is there. He's at a wedding feast. They're celebrating somebody getting married, likely a family member of his. I'm sure he drank a little bit of wine, right? This also where he performs the first miracle, where the jugs of water, he turns them into wine. For Christians here, don't get drunk, right? That's what it comes down to. If you're not a believer, I still think that you should probably try to stay away from alcohol. I think the side effects far outweigh the benefits. So be mindful, be careful, and consider what's what is being talked about here, and consider what Jordan Peterson is saying about how this really affected him and how it impacted his ability to process things. And honestly, one of the things that he says that I think is one of the strongest arguments against it is how alcohol has these effects of some of these powerful drugs for some people. He doesn't say that it's the same thing, but for some people, they function in that same manner. I think that's something that should be concerning and something that we should all think about.
No room in the back seat, even though it was a huge car. It was really not a good car.
So how has acquiring wealth, going from that to where you are today, affected your family, beliefs, and the way you see life?
Well, for me mostly, and I think for my family mostly, like, you have to define wealth in a way, and wealth is a plethora of opportunity. And so, yeah, I have a plethora of opportunity in every possible direction. So that's great. What difference has it made to my day-to-day life? Well, I have more houses. It hasn't made much difference because I already pretty much had everything I wanted, and I'm not particularly interested in the hedonistic end of what wealth might hypothetically bring to you. I was pretty old when all of this blew up around me. And so, but mostly it's just a wealth of opportunity. That's wealth.
So he's used this word hedonistic a couple of times now, and I think it's important that we define it. Hedonistic is to be engaged in the pursuit of pleasure, sensually self-indulgent. I think what he is saying is that this is not the goal for him, right? It's not the focus. He's not just looking to enjoy life. He wants to achieve more than just that. His definition of wealth is interesting, and I'm not sure that's how everyone else would define it. But I do think it makes sense, at least to some degree. This is kind of how I'm summarizing it. Because of the opportunities he has, it has allowed him the ability or the opportunity to accumulate wealth. I like how he points out that since he came into this success later in life, he's able to kind of process it better, right? He's able to navigate it better. What comes to mind for me is, because he's older, and there's some wisdom that comes with age, right? Some wisdom that comes with experience, and that helps him to kind of process this and handle it in a way that's not, harming him or harming his family. There's a few verses in the scriptures talk about how gray hair is a crown of wisdom. And I think that this applies even in this context here.
Investigate and make the way forward. And so, I'm fortunate too that I worked with my wife and we figured out how to work very closely together. And she has a cardinal role to play, and I work with my kids, and that works out very well. And so we're constantly communicating about how to negotiate what's in front of us.
What would you say is your biggest insecurity?
My biggest insecurity. Well, it's probably related to the question that you asked. It's like, how do you keep your feet on the ground? And I'm constantly reminding myself how fortunate I am. My wife almost died. That was quite the catastrophe. I was extremely ill for 3 years in an unbelievable amount of pain. That's gone. People, I'm traveling all around the world and people are pleased to see me. I don't take that for granted. I'm very careful with people. I don't presume that that's normal or ordinary ever, because it's not. I remind myself before I go on stage that I'm lucky to be there, lucky to be alive, lucky that it's not a mad mob, because it easily could be. So gratitude is an antidote to resentment and arrogance.
Notice the long pause before he answers the question about what is his biggest insecurity. That's a tough question to think about and to kind of be put on the spot to answer, right? Um, and I really do appreciate how he takes the question seriously. He's thinking through like, like what would be my biggest insecurity? And honestly, I think that's really good. In this position, I would imagine it's hard not to let all the success and people, clamoring for you, right? They're cheering for you, to not get to your head. And it's hard not to become prideful, right? When people are always telling you how great you are. I love how he emphasizes that gratitude is an antidote. Whenever we see someone receive an award or something along those lines, they always talk about how grateful they are. But what are they grateful to? If you've seen some of my other videos, you see me talk about existential apologetics. And I think this idea of gratitude factors into these existential needs that all humans have and how they point to something greater, something beyond us. So this is from Clifford Williams' book, Existential Reasons for Belief in God. I'm going to read it off on my phone here. So he's quoting another author. This is Miguel Unamuno. He says, Unamuno tells us a couple of ways this can be done. We can let ourselves feel someone's affection, and we can let ourselves feel the ways in which they grasp us. So in this context here, it's talking about love, right? Loving others and being loved. That is the ways that show they want to connect to us. To these, we can add more. We can let ourselves feel the affirmation a friend has expressed and their acceptance of us in spite of our blunders. We can notice the little kindnesses they extend to us and the gratitude we have for those kindnesses. If Unamuno correctly declares that we acquire faith in God in the same way we acquire friends, then it is but a short step from the latter to the former. I think what this shows is that all of us have this innate kind of feeling of gratitude, right? We want to be grateful to something, to someone. I think this just further indicates and shows that there is a creator. But it's more than just that, right? This creator loved us so much that he came down to be in relationship with us. And when that relationship was severed, he restored that relationship. Let's remind ourselves to be grateful and keep our eyes fixed on Jesus. Thanks for tuning in. I'll catch you next time.